Good luck. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and we're going to get started, so if you could please find a seat. I'd like to notify everybody that this evening's presentation is being broadcast live on YouTube, and it will be available for future rebroadcast at any time. So notice did go out about that being available to the public, so we hope that people are making and taking advantage of that. So I'd like to say welcome on behalf of the Council Rock School District, and thank you for coming to this public forum on a proposed redistricting plan for the Council Rock School District. My name is Barry Desco. I am the Director of K-12 Education, and also presenting tonight is Dr. Susan Elliott, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning in Council Rock. So welcome and thank you for coming. First, on behalf of Dr. Frazier, I would like to send his apologies in regards. He is unable to make this evening's meeting. He is ill and is disappointed that he can't be with us, but has been a part of this process and will continue to be moving forward. Also, it's important for us as a school district to recognize the committee members, the community people who have volunteered their time to serve on this committee. And those names were made available to the public. We just want to take an opportunity to thank them for the work that they've done so far and the continuing work they will do. We're very pleased with the seriousness with which they took the responsibility for a very, very difficult task, their interest in serving the community as well as their interest in trying to serve the students and the families of the district. And I also want to say with this in mind that we recognize change is difficult. We do understand that. We understand it can be emotional, it can be frustrating, and that's the purpose of this evening's meeting, an opportunity for us to share with you what brought us to this point, an opportunity to tell you what led to the decision-making process, and then an opportunity to hear from you. This is a chance for us to get feedback, to hear your concerns, to hear any suggestions and recommendations, maybe to answer some questions. We're not sure that we can answer all of those, but it is an opportunity to give us that feedback that the committee will look at, think about, consider, and then make additional decisions as we move forward before presenting a plan to the school board. So with that, we ask that because of the potential emotion, that when we have this opportunity for an interchange and an exchange that will take place in our breakout sessions, we just ask that that be a respectful opportunity to have a sharing of ideas and discussion. So tonight is a number of things that we'd like to convey to you. This particular part of the session won't be extremely long, but we want to talk about the history of capital planning in Council Rock and why the things that took place previous to this have brought us to today. Then we're going to talk about the redistricting process, followed by the transition plans that we are considering for any proposed changes. Then the proposed plan itself that has probably garnered most of the attention for you on the website and through information that's been shared over the course of time. And then lastly, we will have some breakout sessions and community feedback. And we'll speak more specifically about what that looks like and where those will take place at the end. So a little bit of the history of capital planning. It's been going on in Council Rock for a period of time, and many of you have probably heard years ago some of the conversations that took place. There were a number of components that were a part of the capital planning process. One of those was school consolidation, whether or not we had too much capacity, not enough capacity, and what we would do based on those findings. At that time, there was a decision to make Wrightstown Elementary School, which was previously a K-6 school, and convert that to a K-4 school with 5th and 6th graders from Wrightstown attending Newtown Elementary. We also, in the not too distant past, made a decision to consolidate our middle schools. And what that decision was to build and expand our two current middle schools of Holland and Newtown, and a decision also made that we would close Richboro Middle School and consolidate from 3 to 2 middle schools. Also a consideration with that was a redistricting conversation and a chance to look at the growth within the district or the shrinkage within the district, whichever might be occurring, look at the impact of that on our school buildings, and then start a conversation about what that should look like so that we could use our school facilities in the wisest fashion to serve the students in Council Rock. And as part of that conversation, before moving to any significant discussions about redistricting, the board made a decision at that point in time that students in the current 7th through 11th grade would be grandfathered. So those students would stay in their current schools and their current sending patterns through graduation. That at this point in time has been the only grandfathering discussion that is taking place, and we recognize that there are other conversations and questions you may have regarding that, but none of those can be discussed until such time as a redistricting plan is considered. So a little bit more about the history of capital planning. What occurred was we were beginning to see an imbalance in our high school populations, and we wanted to try to even that out. But that conversation was not just about the high schools. It also included our middle schools as we were shifting from 3 middle schools to 2. In addition, the discussion was we did not want to split elementary schools across feeder patterns. By that, I mean we did not want to take groups of students after redistricting was complete and then break students up and put them into different schools. So you wouldn't take a 6th grade out of a particular elementary school and move them to 2 different middle schools. We also recognize that that has to happen with the initial redistricting, but would not happen after redistricting was complete. In addition, we have islands within our school district. There are a couple of our elementary schools where we call those islands. If you're not clear about what that means, it really means that a geographic area of the district attends a school where they cross the geographic area of another elementary school. So it's not a contiguous border for all the students of a particular community that attend a school. So the consideration was to try to eliminate those islands. Crossing feeder patterns, and what that means is, you know, in Council Rock, there's been a long history of the north and south of the district. And really the creek is what separates what we consider the north and the south parts of the district, but it also delineates some of our municipalities. So at this present time, for the most part, and it's not, you know, 100% this way, but for the most part, students in the southern part of the school district, which is Northampton Township, attend the 6 elementary schools in Northampton Township and Richboro and Holland Middle School and Council Rock South, and then the municipalities north of that creek again, with a few exceptions, attend the 4 elementary schools in the north part of the district, Newtown Middle School and Council Rock North. At times, there were changes to those patterns. Most recently was when Richboro Middle School split between Council Rock North and Council Rock South. That practice ended a few years back, and there were some other minor changes to our districting patterns that have us where we are today. But the board did make a decision that moving from north to south or south to north should be and would be considered. Students would attend a school that is relatively close to their address. Now, if you ever look at a map of Council Rock, you'll recognize that many of the schools that were built at a time when certain areas of the district had populations that needed to feed those schools. And over time, that has changed and shifted. So there are some schools that are surrounded by a lot of open space, and then there are other schools that are relatively close together and feed a pretty densely populated area of our school district. So we do recognize that every student can't attend the school that is closest to their home, but we would try to keep them relatively close. And then lastly, that we would try to make a decision that would redistrict students only one time. So we didn't want to go through a multi-year process with the same students. You'll see a little bit later that our redistricting plan, the proposed plan before you tonight, is a 2-year redistricting, but students in general move only one time because of the change in the redistricting patterns. So very briefly, I just want to give you a sense of the committee structure. So there were 38 members of the committee, and the process started with an application being made to the committee or the community members, asking them to submit information about themselves, their interests, their backgrounds, some things that they could bring to the committee. And through that process, a number of people were selected, 2 specifically from each of our elementary, middle, and high schools. And also in that process, we tried to be geographically aware of where those representatives were coming from. So we didn't want in any particular school sending area 2 people that were neighbors and represented one particular community. We wanted to spread it out a little bit to get differing opinions and views and folks that had some understanding of their general area. In addition to that, we also had 3 building administrators. We had an elementary, a middle, and a high school administrator, so they could just have that sense of a K-12 process within our schools. And then lastly, we had 5 central office administrators, Dr. Elliott and myself included, and we co-chaired the committee. So the redistricting process, and we just want to give you a picture of what went on and how some of the decisions were made so that you get a sense of what led us to this proposed plan. First thing is the data that was used. There's a lot of data that is available to us that are hard facts that we're aware of. We know how many students we have in our current schools. We know what grade levels they're in. But the most difficult part of the redistricting process is utilizing data that we don't know. In other words, what about students that are not yet of school age? What about students that and families that are moving into or moving out of Council Rock? So we had a demographer do all this work for us, who was able to work with townships, work with the Department of Education and the state of Pennsylvania to try to gather as much information as we can. So work was done to see how many births occurred in each of our municipalities. What would that look like as we move forward? Talking with township officials to see what plans are in each of our municipalities for potential building. And then utilizing that along with home sales to see what kind of changes we might expect in our student population. So that helped us to understand our potential number of students in our school district. And then we used that along with the building capacity. So we did a study to better understand how we utilize all of the space in our current buildings. How many classrooms we had, the size of those classrooms, what they could accommodate in terms of whether it was a small group instruction space or it was a full-size classroom that could accommodate a section of a particular grade level. Put all of that together and use that to start the process. We then had community feedback. So we've had a redistricting email address available to the community, and we've been receiving email information over time, and we've continued to put that information together, and share it with the committee members so they could hear some of the viewpoints being expressed by you. So our approach as we went through this process was to establish a number of meetings. We began in October. We had a short break while we did an update with numbers because we wanted to try to work with the most recent demographic data that we could provide. Utilizing that, we then in November began to meet weekly until we got to the point of tonight to put together a proposed plan. As we met weekly, what we did was we started with what we called conceptual plans. Conceptual plans really didn't include individual students. It was a picture or maps of the school district and where boundaries were and what looked like boundary areas that might be able to move to help us to solve what our goals were that we just shared with you a little bit ago and that you'll hear more about as you see what unfolds with the plan. From that conceptual model, and you see that there were 16 different conceptual models, and there were even variations of those 16. We then, if we thought a plan was worth considering, then had that turned into actual students. So the initial conceptual model was just looking at roads, developments, housing, and what fed to each of our schools. And then we would attach students, our student population, to that to see if what looked to work conceptually actually worked in reality. That process was a back and forth. Every time we did that, the committee members would take what we landed on a particular evening. They would take that home with them. They would study it. They would make some of their thoughts and recommendations and suggestions to that. We'd come back again, and that would be a starting point. While that was happening, we also left with a number of other conceptual models and asked the demographer to put those into practical pictures for us. And then we would come back as a collective group and weigh and consider all of that information and then continue down that process. We reached a concept that we thought worked for Council Rock. Again, it was a conceptual model that then we attached students and families and homes to. After we did that, we applied what I've been speaking to, this GIS system, this Geographic Information System, which really was an actual dot on a map that indicated a student or students that lived in a particular area. So all that information helped us to get this broad picture of what this meant if we actually turned this into a reality. And then we made these revisions to these boundary lines as we discussed. So some of the things that were conceptually agreed to that we then turned into a proposed plan. One of those was that we recognized that we were going to have to move students from the south end of the district to the north end. That was being done for a number of reasons. It was done for the elementary school capacity. So we were trying to evenly utilize the space that we had in all of our buildings. It would then also provide feeder patterns to our middle schools that would allow for an evenly distributed student population to our two middle schools. The two middle schools that are under construction and renovation, Holland and Newtown, are built exactly the same size to accommodate the same number of students. And so we wanted to try to utilize those in the same way. That then would also translate into the same feeder patterns to our two high schools, Council Rock North and Council Rock South. So if we were able to solve and meet the criteria for our elementary schools, we knew that it also helped us to better utilize our middle school and our high school capacity. So once we decided that we felt the need to move students from the south end of the district to the north end of the district, we then had to determine where students would come from. And again, the consensus of the committee was that we would work through both the east and the west side of the south part of the district. And I'll give you a reference to what we mean by east and west. Tyler Park was kind of the middle of that southern part of the map. And then we looked to the east of that Tyler Park and then to the west of Tyler Park and used those lines to determine where we might be able to move communities. And then lastly, when we talked about, or I shared with you that not only was this about students, but it was also about building capacities, we were trying to reach approximately 90% utilization in each of our elementary schools. Now, you can't ever get to 90%, and it can't remain at 90% every year. But if that was the target goal, we recognize that, off and on, a school could go up to 91 or 92 or go down to 89 or 88. But relatively speaking, our utilization would be approximately 90%. And I want to make sure that I'm clear in the information I'm giving to you. The 90% still keeps a lot of our schools at very different sizes because we're using 90% of what that building can accommodate in terms of space. How many classrooms can they take based on what's available? So we will still have elementary schools of different sizes, but utilized in a very similar way. In addition, part of our thinking, and this was not the charge of the committee, this was the charge of the administration, and we would share moving down once we have an approved plan, if we are able to either approve this plan or some form of this particular plan, is that there is really a two-phase implementation of the redistricting. So next year, for the 18-19 school year, the only students that would be redistricted would be those students currently in 6th grade moving to 7th grade. And what we would do is we would make an extra special effort to make sure we accommodate and help with that transition, because transitions are difficult. We recognize that when things are status quo. So we also understand that when you add a redistricting and move students from where they either anticipate going to or where they've had other family members go to or friends go to, it's our responsibility to do all that we can to ease that transition for those students and for the families. It really is a two-way street. And we know that parents sometimes have difficulty with moves. We've experienced it before, but certainly with students who have to live being in a new environment, in a new school, making new friends every day. So you just see up here a number of things about trying to get some visitations to some of the schools, getting some tours, providing peers in the school to offer support and give advice about what that particular school and school culture is like. And we would do all of these things and certainly many, many more to try to ease the transition process. The next step then would be for the elementary level. So in the 1920 school year is really when the majority of the redistricting occurs, and that's when the K-6 redistricting happens. And again, that's predominantly the largest number of students that we would move in any one year. So what happens in that particular year is all of the current K-6 students would be redistricted to their new schools. That would be south to north, north within those sending areas, and also with south. And again, a number of opportunities for us would be created to try to ease that transition. It may look a little bit different in our earlier primary grades, K-2 or K-3, a little bit different in our upper elementary grades, but still trying to put forth every effort we can and provide the resources that we can, both human and financial, to help ease the transition for the students and welcome them into their new schools, welcome the parents into their new school community, and help people to feel comfortable with what will be their new school over the course of their elementary grade. So with that, we're going to have Dr. Elliott, who's going to share the proposed plan and give you some of that detail, and then talk to you about the last steps of our evening program.
Thank you, Mr. Desko. So after all of the work that the committee did and looking at the board guidelines and using those guidelines as they analyzed multiple scenarios and various data, as you've heard, the proposed plan that the committee reached consensus on developed a plan that moves 9.39% of our elementary students to a new building. This is important because the committee really looked to try to minimize the impact of movement as much as possible as they could for students. So they really looked at different plans and, well, how many kids will be affected by this? And can we make this better? Can we move fewer students? So that was something that they really worked for. In order to balance enrollment at all the levels, the committee determined that they needed to move approximately 220 students from the south to the north. As they looked at communities closest to the border between the south and the north, as Mr. Desko said, the creek, they looked at the schools located geographically at that border and determined the best scenario was to move students north from both the east and the west side of the southern part of the district, or around Tyler State Park. So they moved students, moving students just from one side of the southern part of the district created an increased number of moves of students that the committee felt was not in the best interest of the district. The committee also looked at scenarios which eliminated the islands that were mentioned earlier, Goodnoe and Holland, as well as plans that did not. And by removing the islands, it also increased the percentage of elementary students that would have been impacted and moved to a new school. So based on that impact to the students, the committee determined that they reached consensus that they should maintain the current islands. The plan balances enrollment at the elementary buildings to bring each building closer to 90%, as you will see in the next slide. The plan will also lead to more balanced enrollment at the middle and high schools, and additionally, it keeps the district's special education programs in their current locations. So, for example, the autistic program that's in Holland Elementary School will remain in Holland Elementary School and will not move to another location. This slide that you see here shows you a comparison based on the enrollment projections for 2022 of capacity and where we would be without redistricting and with redistricting. So if we do not redistrict, we will have a greater imbalance of enrollment in our elementary schools. This chart, which was also posted on the Redistricting Hub on our district website, shows that without redistricting, our southern elementary schools will have much higher enrollment and more will be over 90% capacity, or even over the capacity of what that building can actually hold, and then in our northern schools. After the proposed plan is in place, our elementary schools will be more balanced, with each school being at or slightly below 90% capacity. This plan also impacts our secondary schools. This slide, as you can see, shows that if we do not redistrict and move some students from the south to the north, Holland Middle School will be close to 98% capacity. With the proposed plan, both the middle schools and the high schools will be more closely balanced. This will help us to provide students across the schools with more equitable opportunities and for course offerings, instruction, as well as activities that students can participate in. The balance at the secondary schools will happen over time. Our board has decided that our current 7th to 11th grade students will be grandfathered to their current feeder pattern. Newtown Middle School will go to north and Holland Middle School will go to south. Further, the current 7th grade students are grandfathered into their current feeder pattern. This means that 7th graders at Newtown Middle School will remain at Newtown Middle School and north, regardless of the new elementary boundary lines. Holland Middle School 7th graders will remain in Holland and south, regardless of the new elementary boundary lines. And Richboro Middle School 7th graders will attend Holland Middle School as 8th graders and then south, regardless of the new elementary boundary lines. Our current 6th graders will attend their new middle school based on the elementary feeder schools in September of 2018, based on this proposed plan. So Goodnoe, Newtown Elementary, Soul Finestone Elementary, and Wrightstown will attend Newtown Middle School in north. Churchville, Holland, Maureen Welsh, Richboro, and Rolling Hills will attend Holland Middle School and south. Oops. We acknowledge the hard work and dedication of this committee, as Mr. Desko noted earlier. They have invested many evening hours of looking at data, looking at community feedback, and considering every corner of the district as they develop this plan. The committee worked as a whole and engaged in thoughtful discussions about the many scenarios and the impact of each decision on communities and students. This committee was only charged with focusing on boundary lines. They were not charged with any conversations or decisions about grandfathering. And I must say that I was continually impressed with the level of objectivity and professionalism every single member of this committee displayed as we engaged in this work. The purpose of this community meeting tonight is to provide you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the plan and provide feedback to the committee. You will be able to ask questions and provide feedback in the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will be divided based on the new lines or the new boundary lines for each school. Facilitators in the room will moderate the comments and feedback and allow all voices to be heard. We will also have a facilitator taking notes. And I wish to thank at this time all of our building administrators who are here this evening to help to facilitate the breakout rooms and take notes to gather that feedback for us. Building principals do a lot all day long, and to invest an evening out away from their families to be here is very commendable. Our committee members will also be divided among the 10 rooms, and they will be in each breakout room, and they will hear your feedback and may answer some of your questions. Each facilitator will also have index cards that you may use to write some comments and hand them to the facilitator and note taker. And the session will conclude by 9 p.m. We want to thank you for coming tonight and giving your time this evening to listen and to share your feedback on the proposed plan. We thank you in advance for being respectful of other community members in attendance of the committee and the committee members that are in attendance in each room. We understand very much so that going to a new school creates anxiety and can be stressful for you as well as for your children. And as we noted earlier, each of our principals and our district will work to support all families as they transition to their new schools. What we're going to do now, as you see this chart up here, has the specific room locations for each building. We're very thankful tonight to have members of Council Rock South's National Honor Society here to serve as your guides to walk to the different rooms, since many of you as elementary parents may never have been in Council Rock South and may not know exactly where you need to go. So what I'm going to do is go by building, and the students who are escorting you to that building will raise their hand so you can turn around and look to the back so you can see them. So, Churchville Elementary School. Who are Churchville Elementary School? All right, we have two young men back here for Churchville. If you're going to Churchville, please stand up and head with them. Everyone else just stay seated. Your new school. The new school. Thank you. We will take your feedback tonight as a committee. We will take your feedback. Churchville, you can go ahead and go. My two Churchville people, go ahead. Next we have Goodnoe Elementary. Who are my two folks back there for Goodnoe? You're going to the faculty dining room. Goodnoe people, go ahead and head to the back of the auditorium. Next we have Hillcrest. All right, there are two students back in the middle of the auditorium for Hillcrest. You're going to room 266, which is on the second floor. Hillcrest.
Are you recommending we go to the future school or
Yes.
existing school?
Yes. Please go to the room of your future school. Holland Elementary School. We have two students in the back for Holland Elementary School. You're here in the auditorium 2. They'll tell you where that is. Holland Elementary School. Maureen M. Welsh. We have two students from Marine and Welsh. They're back in the middle of the auditorium. You're going to auditorium 1. They'll tell you exactly where that is. Newtown Elementary School, Newtown. We have two students over to the far side of the auditorium. You're going to A3. They will direct you to A3. One of them is standing up nice and tall. A3, thank you. Richboro Elementary School. Our Richboro students are directly in the back of the auditorium, and you're going to A5. They'll direct you to A5. The young woman is standing. She has a black sweater on. A5. Rolling Hills Elementary School. Back close to where Richboro was. Rolling Hills, you're going to room 261. 261. You have two students back there. Soul Finestone Elementary School. They're also directly in the back. You're going to auditorium 3, which they'll tell you where that is in here. And finally, Wrightstown Elementary School. We have a young man in the back, two gentlemen, I think it is, standing back there. You're going to the cafeteria. They'll take you to the cafeteria. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening.